Welcome to the Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross Show, awakening your full potential and expanding your understanding of how to live fully and joyfully by making conscious choices that promote and maintain vitality in all areas of your life. Now here's your host, Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross. Please be sure to listen to this episode in an environment that is safe. Do not listen to this recording while driving a car or operating any kind of machinery.
Welcome to the Vital Life Radio. It's a beautiful day here in Colorado, and I have a very special guest with me on the program today. It's Dr. Joan Borysenko, who I'm sure many of you know of. She is a Harvard Medical School trained cancer cell biologist and a licensed psychologist. She's also a spiritual mentor and co-founder of Claritas Institute's Interspiritual Mentor Training Program and Soul Care in Healthcare Training Program. A pioneer in the field of psychoneuroimmunology and behavioral medicine, she is also a New York Times best-selling author. The most recent of her 15 books address the tumultuous times we're living in. One is titled, It's Not the End of the World, Developing Resilience in Times of Change. And the book we're going to talk about on the show today, which is entitled Fried, Why You Burn Out and How to Revive. Her work has appeared in peer-reviewed journals as well as the Huffington Post, Oprah.com, and newspapers ranging from the Washington Post to the Wall Street Journal. She is a warm, engaging, and humorous teacher, as you'll learn on the show. You can find out more about Dr. Borysenko and view video and read articles on her website at www.joanborysenko.com. Welcome to the show, Joan.
Hi, Carolyn. What a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, and are you in Colorado now, or are you traveling?
I am in Colorado, and we're going to leave for a road trip, I think, right after. We got the house sitter on the way.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, first of all, I loved your book, and I really liked the name, which is Fried, and I wondered, where did that title come from?
The title came from one of my Facebook friends. You know, when you write a book about a subject that people often suffer from, you want to interview a lot of people about what their experience was. And I started to post questions about burnout on my Facebook page. This went on for a whole year, Carolyn. And one of my Facebook friends is a very cool young man in his 40s who's written 2 books himself. His name is David John Peckinpah, and he made a case for naming the book Fried. And then we had a vote on the Facebook page, and Fried won hands down. So I have to thank David.
Yeah, it's a great title. The other thing I found interesting is that you quote a number of your what you call FBF, Facebook friends.
Right.
Have you done that in the past, or is that a new?
No, I haven't. You know, it was the first time, and I think what happened was that, you know, I travel all over the United States giving lectures and workshops for hospitals and civic organizations about mind-body wellness and resilience, spirituality, things of that sort. And the very cool thing was that I was sitting alone in a hotel room in California, and I thought to myself, I'm feeling a bit burned out myself, and I'm wondering how many other people there are out there. And of course, we know that people in healthcare are particularly prone to burnout, clergy, teachers. There are certain groups. And I thought I would just see what people's experience was. So I just started with posting who feels burned out. And, you know, within an hour I had 60 or 70 stories.
Wonderful. Well, I think the Facebook friend comments are very helpful as part of the book. So the book is about burnout, and I just wanted to start by asking you, facetiously I say, a simple question, and that is, what is burnout and what is the cause of it? Is it just people are doing too much, or, you know, why are we so burned out?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And part of it is that people can't manage the information input at this point. What used to be, great, like, hey, I've got email, turns into problems. For example, like, we're going to go off for a weekend vacation, but unless I check my emails, I'll come back to maybe 1,000 of them in 3 days, and then I will feel completely overwhelmed. And that's a problem for people. I spoke to a physician, actually, recently, who said she, at this moment, has 4,000 unanswered emails. And that's a problem for people. But there's so much information overload everywhere. And then we're in a time of great shift with a lot of economic uncertainty, political uncertainty, and that extends far beyond the United States to the world in general. And I think times when the future is unknown, like even if you have a job where it's not clear to you what's your responsibility and what's not, or if you've got, for example, kids, and it's a hard time to raise kids, what's going on with them? How do you provide security on the Internet? Things like that can lead to burnout. Whenever there's a substantial gap between where you are and where you wish, how you wish your life would be, you have a potential for burnout.
Is there a kind of a research or scientific definition of burnout?
Yes, there is, and that's really important. The research into burnout started in the early 1970s, and it actually started in the corporate sector. And today, there's a really wonderful psychologist at the University of California at Berkeley, and her name is Christina Maslach. And she developed a scale, the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which is just great to know about, because if you know what she's looking for, there are 3 major areas of burnout. You don't really, most of us, need to take the test to say, hey, does that apply to us? So let me tell you what the 3 major indicators of burnout are. The first one is feeling emotionally exhausted and physically depleted. So I'll give you an example. When I find myself flirting with burnout, I'm so emotionally exhausted that I feel I can't stand any more input from anybody. My feelings get so intense and overwhelming that I just want to avoid feeling anything. And I start to go numb. I start to compartmentalize. I start just not wanting to go any place emotional at all, while at the same time being oversensitive. That's emotional exhaustion. Physical depletion, Carolyn, you know about so well, and that is
sadly, I do.
Yes, unfortunately, we know both as medical care professionals what that looks like, because when you start to get stressed out, that's when you develop stress-related disorders. So it may be that you can't sleep, or your blood pressure's going up, or you develop an irregular heartbeat, or you start to get a lot of aches and pains and inflammation. And the number of stress-related disorders is so large that visits to family practice docs for those things account for, almost 3/4 of visits. And just the feeling of fatigue, the biggest, burnout is really, it's an energy disorder. So when we talk about emotional exhaustion and physical depletion, the way that I experience it personally, it's like somebody pulled my plug out from the wall, and there's just nothing left. There's no juice. So that's the first scale, questions that measure emotional exhaustion and physical depletion. The second aspect of burnout is what Christina Maslach calls depersonalization or dehumanization. And basically what happens is that you lose empathy for other people. And in healthcare, we call that compassion fatigue. And here we signed up to help people, and we just can't bear the sight of them anymore. It's just we We can't empathize because there's no room left. We are so exhausted and so depleted that we can't relate to other people. So it's a relational disorder. And it's not just people you work with or people you serve either. I find that for me, when I'm getting into that compassion fatigue situation, I simply get judgmental. I'm a very nice person. I'm not snarky or judgmental, but that's how I get. Suddenly I have a judgment about everything. I'm getting snarky. I have to edit what I'm going to say. And then the third component of the burnout, we've looked at emotional exhaustion and physical depletion. We've taken a look at loss of empathy or compassion fatigue. The third scale measures diminished function because you're not exactly in your best, most creative self. Right. And so whatever it is, whether you're, an at-home parent or you're a professional, you're not doing the job that you'd like to do. So
it seems like it's really difficult not to get into one of these stages. I know I've been in medicine for 30 years, and I've had so many periods where I've fallen into stage 1, 2, or 3 at some particular point, and not just in my career, but I also think, that many of us baby boomers are taking care of parents, or, I'm the only doctor in my family, so a lot of what happens in the rest of the family gets funneled through to me, or people who have special needs children. It seems like it's really difficult not to get burned out.
Well, it's huge. And in fact, people who take care of family members with Alzheimer's are used often in research studies to see what that looks like. Caregivers of any kind are very prone to burning out. And, the three aspects of that scale, the emotional exhaustion and depletion and the dehumanization and the loss of function, they all happen kind of at the same time. So what other researchers have done is look at, more of a stage model to say, okay, there are 12 stages, and the last one looks exactly like serious life-threatening depression.
My guest on The Vital Life today is Dr. Joan Borysenko, and we're talking about burnout. And Joan, when we left to go to break, we were talking about the 12 stages of burnout. And maybe you can just mention some of the highlights of those 12 stages so people can kind of understand. Do the stages help them to recognize when they're in burnout, or? Well,
that's exactly it, because here's the problem, Carolyn. I was so burned out for several years, and I went from doctor to doctor trying to find out what was wrong with me. I thought I had chronic fatigue syndrome. And my physician, actually didn't know. She says, well, maybe it is a variant of chronic fatigue. My thyroid function looked good. Basic health indicators looked good. So I went to an acupuncturist who looked at me and said, oh, my God, there's no chi, no life force flowing. And she frightened me so much, I never went back. And, I went to a whole variety of practitioners, and nobody knew that they were looking at burnout. My family practice doc actually gave me a prescription for Zoloft, which I tried for 2 weeks, and I had such a bad reaction to it. It gave me such restless energy and anxiety, and it felt like something awful chemically was going on in me, that was the end of that. But what I've realized is that although the literature on burnout is excellent and has been around now for almost 40 years, most people still cannot recognize it unless they work for big corporations. For example, the employee assistance programs, because they're looking for it in that sector. So the stages of burnout, which were identified back in the early 70s by a couple of psychologists, these are really useful because they help you make the distinction, am I burned out? Am I depressed? Do I need help in some way? How can I help myself so that I don't go down the slippery slope to what can be really a terrible physical and mental health crash? So that's the point. And as I take a look at these stages, one thing to recognize is nobody has all the stages. It's not like you have every single thing on the list. And also, they're not necessarily in order. But the stages start with simply working too hard. And I know that, that happens for people sometimes just in seasons, like tax accountants around
Right.
Or, for me, I just came back on the road from a spring, kind of spring speaking tour. And normally I'm not gone that much and I'm not working that many hours. But I'm talking about the kind of working that's happening all the time. For example, I know a man who, he was a business consultant, and he does a great job, but he's at the office frequently until 1, even 2 in the morning. And I can tell you, this is not a sustainable way to live when you're working 14, 15 hours a day. That's why I think, for example, you in your medical training, my goodness, physicians are brought up to burnout. It's such a dehumanizing process to be on call at all hours and, work in a way that your body can't really keep up.
Well, I know that many of my patients that I work with who have burnout or stress-related problems, they get into a position where they feel, I'm the only one who can do what I do. So I can't, and physicians, I think, are particularly vulnerable to that. Nurses, very, very high risk for burnout. And they get into that mindset where, I have to do this work. It's important. I'm saving lives, or I'm, and is that because you have stage 1 driven by an ideal?
Well, that's exactly right. You're much more likely to burn out if you feel like you're serving an ideal. And I know this makes people scratch their heads because they say, well, I was called to this. I knew I was supposed to be a doctor or a nurse or, a clergy person. And somehow we feel we're protected because we are idealistic. But
So the other, and I think that is that passion fuels burnout in some ways until it's too late. And so we've talked about driven by an ideal and working like a maniac. And then stage 3 is putting your own needs last. And stage 4, miserable and clueless as to why.
Well, that's right. And the putting your own needs last part is really a giveaway. I know, Carolyn, that in times when I've been burned out, I just can't seem to find the time to go have my teeth cleaned. Or, my hair is way overdue and I have no time to even go have my hair done. My exercise program, which is important to me, tends to go south. I just don't have time. I mean to, but all day long passes and I never found the hour that I needed, to go. I can't go to the gym to work out because I live in the mountains. It'd take me 40 minutes just to get to the gym. But when I know, look, there's 24 hours in a day and I can't find even a half an hour to take a walk, that's really a giveaway for me. That's a big clue that I'm on that slippery slope to burnout. So self-care, lack of self-care is really a big one.
And I see that a lot in mothers, who have children, either younger children or, even middle school kids where you have to drive them everywhere, that they always put themselves last, and that's a good clue. So in stage 5, you've called stage 5 the death of values. And I'd like you to say a little bit about that, but I also have a question because you have a list there of ways that you know that you're flatlining. And so I wanted you to include, when you talk about the death of values, what is flatlining and how can people know about it?
Well, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine who actually has written an ebook with this story in it, so I can can tell you. She's wonderful. Her name is Marilyn Tam, and she's been the CEO of several large companies. Reebok and Aveda. She's a wonderful woman. But she tells the story of her sister calling to make plans for Christmas. And she says, I'm just too busy. I can't do Christmas this year. That's what I call the death of values. And, for example, let's say that birthdays have been a big thing for you. And you are absolutely so busy that you don't care anymore. You're not interested in your birthday. You're not interested in presents. In fact, let's say somebody sends you a gift in the mail. Instead of being delightful and thrilled that somebody remembered you, your response might be, oh, my God, I have to open this box. I have to recycle the cardboard, and then I'm going to have to write a thank you note. It was time to write a thank you note. That's what I mean by the death of values, those things which have been important priorities in your life that have kind of kept you on a track of balance, of being, of, yes, my work is important, but so are so many other aspects of my life, spending time with friends or, showing up for Sunday dinners with family. They just go by the wayside. So that's what the death of values is about. And
we have a few minutes before break. And what is flatlining when you talk about that?
What flatlining is this. It is, for most of us, for all of us, life is about having rhythms. There are times when you work hard. There are times when you rest. There are times to go on vacation. There are times when you're in crunch time. And all of energy flows like that as waves. When you're flatlining, there are no more waves. You're just like doing one thing. You're working all the time. There's no time for rest. There's no time for fun. You forget about going on road trips or seeing the friends you would like to see. You're just working. And that's called flatlining. And, of course, flatlining from a medical perspective is like death. You've lost cardiac rhythm or you've lost your brain function. And that's what burnout really is. It's the loss of the rhythm of life. You're flatlining.
I like that word because it also brings to mind that you've lost heart, too. When you think of losing heart rhythm, you've also lost heart in the metaphorical sense when you're burned out. So this stage 6 you talk about is called frustrated, aggressive, and cynical. And I think, I know that's very obvious to me because when I get to that stage, I'm constantly angry all the time and easily agitated. And in that stage, you talk about the 80-20 rule. Could you, in the last minute and a half we have, could you speak to that or get us started on that?
Well, yes. And that is, for the most of us, we get, actually, this is called Pareto's Law, we get 80% of what is really important done in 20% of our time. And so what you need to do is to really prioritize and say, what are the high-impact activities that I need to do that are most important? And then you find you can reclaim a lot of the other 80% of your time where you're not getting that much done anyhow. And as soon as you begin to realize that, you can say, I'm better to spend a lot of that time rejuvenating myself, because the truth is you get much more done when you feel a sense of restfulness inside of yourself, when your cup is full, when you've done things to revive yourself. Then that's when the quality of your work really soars, and you're not flatlining anymore. The rhythm comes back to your heart, metaphorically and physically.
My guest today is Dr. Joan Borysenko, and we've been talking about her book, Fried, Why You Burn Out and How to Revive, and just about burnout in general. So when we left for break, we were talking about stage 6 of the 12 steps of burnout. And I loved your metaphor about the twisted sister and the fairy godmother. Can you say a little bit about that? Because I think it's...
First of all, I want to say that the whole idea of twisted sister and the fairy godmother has to do with the way that women approach the world. And that is, we've been socialized. Virginia Woolf talked about this. We've been socialized to martyr ourselves. If there's a drafty chair, we take it to sit in. If there's a piece of food that's less good than the others, we'll take it. And, American women are too good to be true, superwoman, do everything, take the kids everywhere if you've got kids, or, be constantly beautiful and improving yourself. So that's the fairy godmother, too good to be true. But Twisted Sister is like an alter ego that comes out when you've been so good and you've done so much to serve other people that you start to get really resentful, resentful of the same people that you've been serving because there's nothing left of you. And you're starting to burn out. So, another way of looking at this is say, hey, you've got to be on the lookout for Twisted Sister. And she's the one who is frustrated, who is aggressive, who is cynical, who says, hey, all this good stuff I believe in, phooey on it, it's a bunch of junk. And my husband always points out when I'm starting to get that way, and the very things that mean the most to me, suddenly I start to question them. And my patience, I completely run out of patience. And I just don't want to do one more thing for one more person. So there's the emergence of Twisted Sister.
And that probably takes you into stage 7, which you say is the emotionally exhausted and disengaged stage.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, because at that point, you're so undone you could care less. And you lose your motivation. And what people don't recognize about burnout is, yes, it's very stressful, but it's different than stress. It's a loss of motivation. So suddenly the things that you were so passionate about, you just they've lost their savor. There's no juice in them anymore. And, you can feel temporarily burned out, or this can be kind of a long-term thing. But I know, for example, if I get home after a lot of traveling and I think to myself, I cannot go near this computer, I cannot stand the thought of doing email, but I'd love the idea of going out in my yard and weeding. What I actually do is figure the email, for the most part, I can pick off the things that are most important, and the rest of it will have to wait. Because if at this point you don't do what revives you, then you really start to go downhill very fast from that point. So that's what's great about these stages. You recognize, I'm really in the danger zone here, really. And unless I choose for what fills my well and gives me energy, then I'm really going to go into depression, and that's exactly what will happen.
Now, you said that stress is different from burnout, but also in your book you talk about that depression is different from burnout. So how can someone who's, not sure whether they're just depressed, kind of like you, and with your trial on Zoloft, how can they make a distinction between depression and burnout?
Well, here's the major distinction. Somebody who is depressed, if you say, you know what, you're going to take a month off from work and go on vacation. Now, let's say Oprah has discovered you and is sending you to Tuscany for the month. The person who is burned out will revive instantly when they're taken out of the situation. A person who is depressed will still be depressed. So you can say that burnout is much more situationally dependent than depression, and that's really a major distinction, because otherwise, when they're going on, they are almost indistinguishable from one another. And what that leads to is a huge number of people who get put on antidepressants for absolutely no reason whatsoever.
Well, I found it shocking, the statistic you quoted in your book, that Americans use 2/3 of the world's supply of antidepressants. I mean, that can't possibly be due
Yes, isn't
to a
that
biochemical problem that only exists in America.
well, yes, exactly right. And it's, it's due to the fact that, whether you're talking about drug companies, Carolyn, or you're talking about agribusiness and the way we eat, an awful lot of the lives of Americans are dictated by profits for big business. And, I feel almost awful. It sounds almost cynical to say something like that, but it's actually the truth. So antidepressants are an enormous money-making machine for drug companies. And everywhere you look, you find published lists of symptoms of depression. And in fact, they're almost exactly the same as symptoms of burnout.
And so you're saying that using something like an antidepressant really won't affect your symptoms of burnout?
No, it's not going to affect your symptoms of burnout. They're not caused by the same thing. And furthermore, in order to really deal with burnout, you're not dealing with a biochemical abnormality of any kind. You're dealing with lifestyle choices. And if you start to go and take drugs to make yourself feel better and feel more complacent, what that means is it takes away the motivation to take a look at, hey, how can I change my life? How can I revive? How can I make a different set of choices that will allow me to do what I love, to recover my passion, to maybe discover a new passion? Instead, drugs can keep you stuck. And it doesn't have to be antidepressants, because one of the stages of burnout is that, people get so tired of feeling bad that they look for ways to make themselves feel better. And that's when suddenly the occasional glass of wine with dinner expands to wine every night, and then forget about the one glass of wine, it's 2 glasses of wine or half a bottle of wine, or, deciding to visit your local marijuana dispensary because you feel so bad that, you feel like it's a medical thing. I need this. And
we certainly have a lot of those here in Colorado.
We sure do.
And I think there's also, as you were mentioning earlier, people in burnout can have real physical problems, such as chronic pain. And chronic pain is often treated with, lots and lots of prescription narcotics, and that can become a drug of abuse. Or you may have anxiety related to it or panic attacks, and then get into using medications for that when, like you say, you need to change your lifestyle.
That's exactly right, and that's what happens. And, frequently, here's the problem. I mean, if you're going to a family doc because you're experiencing fatigue, and that's often the first thing people will say is, I'm just so tired. I'm so tired all the time. And that's I'm sure, one of the primary complaints that people bring to family practice docs is fatigue. Mm-hmm. And because of that, because it's so common, and because physicians just don't know it, it's so easy to get stuck taking a lot of different drugs, which just mask the problem.
Yeah. And when we talk about burnout and its effect on health, because we know that stress has a lot of effect on health too. Is there a difference in how stress affects our health versus how burnout does, or just more worse than stress?
Well, essentially what happens is that burnout is not caused by stress alone. It's part of it. But once you're burned out, it's an incredibly stressful condition. And so you get all of the stress-related illnesses. So, they're similar from that, from the standpoint of, stress-related illnesses are, it can cause stomach problems. If you have allergies or autoimmune diseases, it can make those worse. In fact, stress can make almost any chronic disease worse.
Well, I had a guest on a few weeks ago, Dr. Esther Sternberg, and she works with things in our environment that are healing, and also how stress affects health. And it was a very interesting interview, but she told a personal story about taking care of her mother who was dying of breast cancer. And then shortly after her mother died, she went to Greece and was hiking in Greece and developed knee pain. And then on, one joint after another was in pain. And she herself is a rheumatologist. So she was, kind of ignoring the problem and thinking, well, I just need to rest or whatever. And eventually she was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And I've heard that a lot of people who develop autoimmune diseases, that there is a stress-related component for that development of inflammation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, in my book, Fried, I tell the story, and it was, when you tell a story in a book, you want to avoid it being anybody's story in particular, but of course you pick things that have actually happened to different people so that the story is true in theory, although not to the life of any one person.
This is our last segment, and I just wanted you to finish the story that I interrupted, and then we want to talk a little bit about burnout in teenagers.
Okay, just a quick end to that story. In Pride, when I looked at, what's the final stage 12, when you're depressed and your body is in dire straits, it was the story of a woman who had ended up with very severe lupus, which is an autoimmune disease. And there's no question that this kind of severe stress over a long time can really both initiate and make autoimmune disease much worse. And in fact, that kind of tremendous stress can be a promoter for cancer that's caused by something else, but is really aggravated by the tremendous stress. Mm-hmm. So, I don't want to underestimate for people that it's a major health challenge to be burned out. It's
not just something we should change, but it actually has serious consequences. And I'm seeing a lot of teenagers and some smaller children, even like 5-year-olds, who have diseases that are linked to stress, like, reflux disease or ulcers or chronic stomach pain, sleep disturbances. What do you know about burnout in children and teens?
Well, this is a really short question because the answer is not much. I'm sure you know a great deal more. So I'd like to hear from you, Carolyn.
Well, what I see is that many of our children are being forced in the same kinds of lifestyles that we take. They're overscheduled. There's no downtime because many parents are afraid to let their children out of their sight. There's no exploration time. And I know, growing up, we had so much different, use of our time than our children do now. And I think that it's really hurting them. And I'm seeing a lot of kids with depression, and it may be that some of them really are just experiencing burnout. But I know in your book you linked some of the problems that we see in adults to childhood trauma, and that's another factor that I think influences this risk for burnout in children, because in my work with eating disorders, we know that people with eating disorders who have a history of abuse or trauma have a hyper reaction to stress. They have an upregulation of that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And so I think that's one of the other links. And in your book, you talked about the study that's being done that links childhood trauma or abuse or being in a home with alcoholic parents. I can't remember the other.
Or depressed parents or a parent in jail or even a one-parent home. These are all facts. These are what they call adverse childhood experiences, and there are 9 categories. And what happens is if you add up your number of adverse childhood experiences, let's say, you had an alcoholic parent, a depressed parent, you had maybe contact sexual abuse, you had a parent who was emotionally abusive, that gives you an A score of 4 because you had 4 categories. if you look later in life, even 50 years later, what you will find is that your ACE score as a child is a perfect predictor of your health, emotional health and physical health later in life. And we all have the idea, oh, well, that happened a long time ago, time heals. But it turns out from very good research data that that's completely false. Time only conceals. And people who are most prone to burnout are often people who, you know, have done their best to overcome various difficult circumstances. But as you said, underneath it all, they have more of a hyperactivity of their stress system, of that hypothalamo-pituitary-adrenal axis, where they're putting out more of the stress hormones, more of the cortisol.
And they have higher risk for depression, for drug and alcohol problems. There were some other medical or health-related problems that they're at much heart disease and high blood pressure. So it's, you know, if those experiences start in childhood, I'm sure that some of the stress also has an effect on the child, and that's maybe why we're seeing more children, even with things like ADD and ADHD, because it affects the brain. You know, some of the experiences that we're talking about. So I think it's important to look at what's happening with our children and to see how we can simplify their lives and not increase the amount of stress that they're experiencing.
Absolutely.
So before we end, I want to make sure that we talk about how do we treat burnout, and we have about 4 minutes to the close. So,
all right, the first way that you treat burnout is you've got to take time, even a weekend, where you just unplug, stop everything, and face yourself, and start to reflect on what my life is like. My last episode of burnout happened because I had a head-on collision, and I ended up with 5 days in the hospital to reflect on my life.
A forced reflection.
It was a forced reflection, and I made very different choices. I ended up actually quitting my job at that time and saying, this is not worth it to me. I cannot live like this because I'm making a living, but I have no life, and I'm losing my life. You don't, of course, always have to quit your job, but it may be that upon reflection, you realize you have to live your life very differently. You have to make different choices. You have to figure out what revives you. For me, it's outdoors. So, for example, we moved up to a place in the mountains because that gives me energy. And it's a matter of, I started by saying burnout is a disorder of your energy system. And you have to be able to back up and reflect and say what drains me of energy, what gives me energy. And you have to start plugging the drains. For example, sometimes you have friends who are not really good allies. They're always like creating a pity party for you to join. It doesn't help. Or maybe it is that you have an inability to say no to things, and you say yes to things that take up all your time. And you have to learn not to say yes so fast. Say maybe. Or if somebody asks you to do something and you don't want to do it, don't. But you can give them a little something. You know, if somebody asks me to review a book, I can say, I can't review your book, but tell me what it's about, and if I like it, I can mention it in a newsletter. So in other words, you don't have to give people everything. And this is a chance to really take a look at yourself as an energy being and say, what gives me fun? What gives me joy? What are the things I do in service that make my life worth meaning? And what are the things that I can eliminate? Because I'll end on that 80-20% law, Pareto's law. In terms of what you do in this lifetime that gives joy to yourself, that helps others, that is a good thing to do, truthfully, you can do it with 20% of your time. The other
well,
80%,
on the back of your book, you say revival from burnout is all about the recovery of lost authenticity. And I just wanted to end with a quote that our mutual friend, Lee McCormick, who owns the ranch and is quite an interesting man. He says, being authentic is the natural condition of humans. When we are authentic, we express spontaneously with love and joy for life. As young children, we started out connected to nature, to the wholeness of life, and felt free to express that connection. As we grew, we began to be programmed in order to fit into society's beliefs. Some of these beliefs served us well, and many created conflict within ourselves. So we started self-judging and self-rejecting based on what we were taught, and as a result, we lost our authentic selves. So unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that's all the time we have today, but I really want to thank you, Joan, for being a guest on the Vital Life Radio. And also want to just let everyone know that Joan's book is called Fried, Why You Burn Out and How to Revive. And we'll be back next week where we'll be talking more about energy healing, energy medicine, and how we manage our own energy. Thanks again, Joan, for being on the show.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me, and I should tune in next week. I'm going to learn a lot from next week's show.
Okay. Goodbye.
You have been listening to the Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross Show. Please visit CarolynRossMD.com. That's CarolynRossMD.com to access podcasts, show archives, and more about Dr. Ross and her services.